The person you're looking at is incredibly evil, and pretty recently they've been charged with some very serious crimes. They're involved with what's being referred to as the Outagamie House of Horrors, and once I tell you about it, you'll be mind blown. In this video, I'm going to be discussing a series of disturbing things that happened around the world, many that have footage attached to them, and many of which you've probably never heard of, because that's what I do. So, I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. On September 26, 1997, a television crew from a company called Umbria TV was filming inside the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, Italy. They were there to document damage from an earthquake that had struck 9 hours earlier, and their cameras captured something unbelievable. But before we get to that footage, I just want to explain to you who was inside that building and why they were there, because obviously that's very important. By 1997, the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, Italy had stood on its hillside for nearly 800 years. Built in the 13th century to house the remains of St. Francis, it's a very important pilgrimage site and a massive treasure of medieval art. The structure had survived earthquakes in 1279, 1328, 1703, and dozens of other years, but always emerged intact. So when a magnitude 5.7 earthquake struck at 2:33 in the morning on September 26, those there did what they were supposed to do. They closed the basilica to visitors and called in experts. By mid-morning, an inspection team of about 20 to 30 people had gathered inside to assess the damage. Among them were two art surveyors in their 40s. Both of them were local men, and they'd spent their careers protecting the treasures of their hometown. Of course, there were several priests present, and there was a 22-year-old from Poland who had arrived just 10 days earlier to begin his training. In his final letter home, he wrote, "Don't be sad, because if you believe and I believe, it's as if we're in the same place." All of these individuals, including a television crew from Umbria TV, stood inside the basilica after this earthquake. But then something unexpected happened. As the cameras were rolling, at 11:40 in the morning, the ground moved again. This earthquake was much stronger, and the building that had survived nearly 8 centuries wasn't going to survive this one completely. Here's what the footage captures. In this footage, 2 massive sections of the vaulted ceiling broke away and came crashing down. We of course see the dust exploding outwards and a ton of stone plummeting to the floor, but unfortunately, many people ran in that direction as it began to collapse. Most people inside managed to run towards the walls in those first seconds and escaped, but 10 people were trapped under the rubble that piled up in this footage. We can even see the cameraman get completely surrounded in this dust. A photographer who was outside tried to push open the heavy door, but found it blocked. Through a single crack, he saw clouds of dust pouring out, and he heard voices calling from inside. Fortunately, these people would eventually make it outside, but he recalls knowing that at this point, it was way worse than he had expected. In the aftermath, rescuers worked for hours while aftershocks continued shaking the damaged structure. 6 people were pulled out of the rubble alive, but unfortunately, 4 didn't make it. Among those deceased were the 2 art surveyors, the priest, and his young Polish student. All 4 of them passed away instantly. Throughout the town, people gathered near the basilica with tears streaming down their faces. The basilica eventually reopened 2 years later after a massive restoration effort, and most people who go there have no idea this even happened, and I've seen comments under the video itself that say things along the lines of, "I was there very recently and I had no idea." Though some sections were so thoroughly destroyed, they could never be reconstructed. But of course, this was about more than just a building. Art is art, but 4 innocent lives were lost. There wasn't all too much information I could find on this in English, admittedly, so a lot of this was translated through Italian sources, and I didn't want to include any fluff or things that weren't completely verifiable. But either way, this footage is absolutely wild, and when it comes to important historic structures like this, it's probably some of the only footage of its kind out there. Rest in peace to all of those who lost their lives. So this one's ongoing, but every once in a while I come across a case like this, and the fact that this was allowed to happen and that so many people were in on it for so long is mind-blowing. In 2020, a young girl moved into her father's trailer home in the town of Oneida, a small community in Outagamie County in Wisconsin. She was around 9 years old at the time, and her biological mother had reportedly gone to jail. So she went to live with her dad, Walter Goodman III, his wife Melissa, and the other members of their household on Hattie Lane. Around this time, everything was still relatively normal. She'd been attending Oneida Nation Elementary School, and the teachers there remembered her being very friendly and talkative. By all accounts, she was just a regular kid adjusting to a new living situation, but after that school year ended, the family reported that they would be homeschooling her. And in the years following this, she never went back to a classroom. She also just stopped seeing the doctor in September of 2020, and yeah, you can probably see where this is going. This so-called home on Hattie Lane consisted of Walter, who's 47, his wife Melissa, who's 50, Melissa's adult daughter Savannah, who's 29, and Savannah's partner Kayla, who's 27. There was also a teenage stepbrother. As months turned into years, this young girl's world began to completely shrink. She was confined to a bedroom with a mattress on the floor, a webcam was installed to monitor, and she was required to ask permission through that camera if she wanted to leave. A barrel bolt lock was later found that matched the screw holes on her bedroom door, and text messages recovered from the adults' devices showed just how terribly they spoke about her during this time. But as time went on, these texts started to become more about her weight and how they were concerned. By this point, she was incredibly skinny. And I just want to say, I'm using the word concerned. I don't think they were actually concerned for her. Obviously, they're just concerned about what would happen if this was ever found out. And trust me, they were about to find out. These texts revealed that they knew exactly what was happening. They knew what they were doing to her, and they knew the consequences that could come. 5 years passed without a single doctor's visit. There was no school, and during this period, no one outside the home even laid eyes on her. But on the evening of August 21st, 2025, Walter Goodman finally called 911. He reported that his now 14-year-old daughter was severely ill, lethargic, and almost comatose. He said this was going on for about 6 days and that she hadn't eaten for 4 or 5. When Oneida police officers arrived at the trailer and saw the girl, they thought she was 6 years old, maybe 8 at the oldest. They actually refused to believe that she was the age that she was, 14. Medical personnel documented her condition and she weighed 35 pounds. To put that into perspective, that's the average weight of a 4 or 5-year-old child. It placed her below the 0.01 percentile for her age. She was immediately airlifted to a children's hospital near Milwaukee, where doctors found severe malnutrition and multi-organ dysfunction affecting the heart, the liver, the pancreas, and lungs. Walter Goodman offered poor explanations to investigators. He claimed that his daughter was autistic, that she wouldn't eat, that she'd stay awake for 3 weeks at a time, but the hospital obviously told a very different story. When the girl was given regular meals, she ate. She ate very normally, actually. During her hospitalization, she gained nearly 20 pounds. She grew 3 inches, and when tested, her cognitive function fell within normal range for her age, directly contradicting everything that the dad was saying. And a former teacher also disputed this autism claim, saying she had no knowledge of such a diagnosis. I read that in the hospital, when a nurse told the girl that she was going to receive 3 meals a day, her eyes just lit up and the nurse started listing all the food options that she could have, but then her face changed quickly as she was worried about what her father would think. It's unbelievably messed up. In November of 2025, all 4 adults were arrested and charged with multiple felony counts of chronic child neglect, each facing potential sentences exceeding 80 years if convicted. At the initial court appearances, the court commissioner said that the child had been living in a house of horrors and that, by the grace of God, she didn't pass away. The prosecutor called it the most egregious case that she'd seen in nearly 25 years, and as of now, the young girl has been released from the hospital and placed with other family members. She has approximately doubled her body weight and continues to recover, which I love to hear, though obviously she's going to require consistent physical therapy and probably a lot of psychological therapy as well. When she first arrived at the hospital, she didn't even know what deodorant was. She had been so isolated that basic things like this were completely foreign to her. The 4 defendants remained in custody awaiting trial, with hearings scheduled through January 2026. Neighbors expressed complete disbelief, with one asking how this was allowed to happen and saying, "These people should be locked up forever." I agree. As the legal process continues, we can only hope that justice is served. I'm really sorry that she had to go through this, and I hope she continues to improve. Now, this is a case that isn't as obscure. It's been covered before on some bigger channels, but it's generally only told from one perspective, and that's one that focuses more on the killer. A close friend of the victim's family, who's pretty active in my Discord, reached out and asked if I could cover this, hoping I could focus a little more on the victim himself. and I was more than willing to do so. Of course, we still will get into the dark details, but I think telling it this way is a bit better and honestly just makes more sense too. It helps you understand the whole picture. In April of 2022, 21-year-old Aaron William Davis walked across the graduation stage at BYU, Idaho. He still had a legal internship in North Carolina to complete before formally earning his degree that July, but he was already well mapping out the next steps of his life. Aaron was a pretty conscientious person. He worked many different jobs to pay for school. He absolutely loved philosophy, and he'd read multiple books at a time. He aimed to first become a high school civics teacher before eventually earning a PhD to become a professor. And also in May of 2022, Aaron had met a girlfriend at a church campout. Now, she lived over in Alabama, and by this point, Aaron had moved back home to Georgia from school, so this long-distance relationship required effort, but Aaron was more than happy to make the drive to see her. They described their love as magical, and he really had found exactly what he'd been looking for. He often talked about wanting to get married and starting a family, and he particularly looked forward to being what he called a girl dad. That November, Aaron took the GACE, the Georgia Teacher Certification Test in Political Science, scoring high and moving one step closer to his goal of becoming a high school government teacher. Absolutely everything seemed to be falling into place for Aaron, and I will say, for his age, he really did have it together. Unfortunately though, things were about to take an incredibly unexpected and horrible turn. November 10th, 2022 was going to be a pretty busy day for Aaron, but he was ready to take it on. That Thursday morning, he took the GACE and he aced it, texting his mother afterwards with the good news that he'd passed and scored high. And then late that afternoon, he packed for what he expected to be a special trip to finally see his woman again in Alabama. He texted her that the visit was going to be epic. He was all ready to leave, and this drive would actually take him through Rome, Georgia, where his longtime best friend Brandon was staying at his parents' home. So it was a perfect opportunity to stop overnight and catch up with someone who had been part of his life since 8th grade. Aaron's last conversation with his family before leaving that Thursday was cheerful and optimistic. And as he loaded his blue Toyota Prius and headed south, excited about what lay ahead, he'd have no idea that this would be the last time he'd ever see them. The friendship that drew Aaron to Rome that evening stretched back nearly a decade. Brandon Reisner wasn't just some acquaintance or something like that. This guy was practically family to him. He shared countless meals with Aaron at the Davis dinner table and slept over so frequently that Aaron's mother later said he seemed to spend more time at their house than his own. They had attended the same LDS church in Cumming and even made amateur films together that they posted on YouTube. Both had also attended BYU, Idaho, though Brandon's time there was brief. It was just one semester in fall of 2021. Aaron had 4 successful years. When Aaron needed a place to stay overnight, calling Brandon felt as natural as calling family because he literally was, and so when Aaron arrived in Rome, Georgia, on this Thursday, he was pretty pumped. The two friends spent Thursday evening at a beer garden, then went back to the Reisner house to drink wine and sing some karaoke. For Aaron, who didn't really drink, this was unusual, but he was enjoying himself. Aaron's last text to his girlfriend that night had been sent at 9:57 p.m., and at around midnight, the two friends finally fell asleep. But later that night, when Aaron was sleeping peacefully in the upstairs guest bedroom, completely out of nowhere, Brandon grabbed a knife from the kitchen, climbed onto the roof, and entered through the guest bedroom window. What he did following this defied everything that everyone thought they knew about him. Brandon full-on attacked Aaron. The poor man would ultimately receive 40 knife wounds all across his body, which proved fatal, before Brandon brought him to the shower and did even more horrible things. Medical evidence later showed that Aaron had no defensive wounds, meaning that he was probably asleep when this happened and never saw it coming. Over the following hours, Brandon methodically covered his tracks, using Aaron's phone to send fake messages to his family and girlfriend, buying tape and cleaning supplies at Walmart, and ultimately burying Aaron's body in a shallow grave beneath an overturned tree. While police were checking the home after finding Aaron's abandoned car, they found a suspicious scene, and Brandon even ended up fleeing from them for a bit before his dad got involved and he was eventually found. Brandon's parents were equally in shock and could not understand what on earth was going on. The subsequent investigation revealed not just a homicide, but an incredibly profound betrayal that simply cannot be understood. Aaron's family deeply struggled to comprehend how someone they had loved and trusted could commit such unthinkable violence. Sarah Davis, Aaron's mother, spoke of the thousands of dinners she cooked for Brandon over the years and mentioned how often he stayed over. She recalled how just a month before the murder, Aaron and Brandon had been hanging out together, and she was devastated knowing that Brandon was already planning to kill her son while she was cooking for him, taking him out to eat, and even bringing him to the fair. Randy Davis, Aaron's father, described the depth of the betrayal, saying Brandon had been as much of a son to them as anyone, and that losing Aaron felt like losing two children at once. Aaron has quite a few siblings, but one of the more heartbreaking details I learned was the impact it had on Aaron's younger brother, who has autism. Sarah explained that this younger sibling just doesn't have that many people, and how Brandon Reisner had taken the one that he did have, the cooler older brother who organized Nerf gun battles for his birthday and always made the time to play with him. The sentencing hearing, tragically, fell on this younger brother's 13th birthday, and the person who reached out to me, who was a friend of the family, also said this. Another sad part of it was that his youngest brother was currently at my little brother's birthday party the night he had gone missing. When he got home, he told his parents he couldn't wait to show Aaron the Nerf gun he had gotten. It's just devastating to read this. Aaron's girlfriend at the time was utterly heartbroken when she learned that Aaron was deceased. She had spent hours running through Rome in the freezing cold, calling his phone and getting responses from Brandon pretending to be Aaron. When she finally learned what had happened, she collapsed and couldn't stop screaming. At the sentencing, she told the judge many details, including how Brandon, the man who killed him, surely would have been a groomsman at their wedding. She then read a love letter that Aaron had written to her, and the judge appeared moved as she spoke the words through tears. It said, "Even if the flap of a butterfly's wing causes one of us to die in an accident or 1,000 monsters manage to bring me down, we'll always have back then, and I would rather spend the rest of my life missing you than never having known you." And in hindsight, this would prove that much more sad. Brandon's own family was devastated by what their son had done, though in impact statements, it seems they did want parole, and they didn't want him to be judged by his one worst mistake, claiming that he was a very loving person and he was deeply mentally ill.
He showed nothing but kindness. He was a part of the Davis's family. There was an open door, a revolving door. I took that boy to scout camp every week.
His mother did speak of carrying the Davis family's grief with her every single day as well, and again insisted that her child was kind and loving but suffered from severe mental illness that wasn't recognized in time. Aaron's parents are genuinely great people, and it seems that they have forgiven them. When the judge delivered Brandon Reisner's sentence in July 2024, he was clear about the magnitude of it all. He acknowledged that while everyone in the courtroom was experiencing tremendous pain, the Davis family's suffering exceeded all others. He sided with the prosecution over the defense's request for the possibility of parole after 30 years. Brandon Reisner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the memorial service that was held 8 days after Aaron's death, so we're going back a bit, his mother delivered a eulogy that captured who Aaron truly was. He was unique, confident in his identity as a child of God, extremely intelligent, but also someone who made everything fun with his enthusiasm for life. A friend wrote that Aaron was such a light and the funniest person in any room. He was so radically kind. The community rallied around the family, but again, no amount of support will ever fill the void left by someone who, in his mother's words, was a young man with a future brighter than the sun. Rest in peace to Aaron Davis.
What led to that? I never knew them ever to have a fight or a disagreement about anything. He's been as much as a son to us as anyone else, so it's really like losing two kids at this point. Seemed happier than I'd ever seen him. And just so much future there, so much potential.
On the morning of December 3rd, 2018, a 62-year-old woman named Maureen Hatcher woke up in her home in St. Augustine, Florida, feeling unwell. She lived a relatively quiet life in her neighborhood and mostly shared her days with her two dogs named Bella and Sadie. She rescued Sadie back in 2013, and the two dogs had become her constant companions. Maureen was a very active woman, and on most days she would have brushed off a bit of morning discomfort and gone about her routine. But this particular morning was pretty different, and as the hours passed, whatever was happening inside her body was growing more noticeable, and eventually it was going to take a very heartbreaking turn. By around 11 o'clock that morning, Maureen found herself in her bathroom when suddenly she collapsed. Without any warning, she went down hard and fast, and her face met the floor before she could ever understand what was really happening. She tried to move but couldn't, and the left side of her body had gone almost completely limp. When she attempted to call out, the words wouldn't form properly. You've probably guessed it, but she was having an ischemic stroke. There was a blood clot blocking the vessel that supplied oxygen to the right side of her brain, and she was now lying helpless on the floor of her own home with no way to reach a phone or get to the door. This was very dire. As the minutes stretched on, Maureen was still kind of there, and she realized that she might pass away right there on that bathroom floor, completely alone and unable to do anything about it. But remember, Maureen wasn't entirely alone. It turns out that her two dogs, Bella and Sadie, had heard her fall, and at some point, Sadie came into the bathroom to investigate. Maureen, barely able to speak, did manage to get out a few desperate words to her dog. She said to Sadie that Mommy needed help, and right after that, the dogs were gone. Now, Maureen's front door had an automatic lock that should have kept the dogs inside, but on this particular day, it must not have latched properly because somehow, Bella and Sadie managed to get that door open and escape into the neighborhood. At around 2 in the afternoon, a neighbor named Alexandra heard frantic barking at her back door, and when she went to investigate, she found Bella in a state of extreme agitation. She knew pretty quickly that something was seriously wrong, so she grabbed a leash and followed Bella back across the street, where she found Sadie still barking urgently at Maureen's open front door. Alexandra was frightened, but she pushed forward anyway and discovered Maureen lying unresponsive. She called 911 immediately, and St. John's County Fire Rescue arrived within 11 minutes. Both dogs were visibly distressed as they watched their owner being taken away, and Alexandra held them up so they could see Maureen one last time before the ambulance doors closed. Now, Maureen started feeling her symptoms at around 7 a.m., and under normal circumstances, 7 hours would be far too long to save someone from a stroke. But Maureen was about to benefit from a recent medical breakthrough that would change everything for her. Instead of going immediately to an ER, paramedics rushed her to Baptist Medical Center in Jacksonville, one of only 7 certified comprehensive stroke centers in the entire state of Florida. There, an interventional neurologist named Dr. Nima performed an emergency procedure called an endovascular thrombectomy, threading a tiny catheter through her femoral artery all the way up to the blocked vessel in her neck and using a specialized device to physically remove the clot. The entire procedure took just 20 minutes, and within hours, Maureen was video chatting with her family as if nothing happened. 3 days later, she walked out of that hospital with full strength restored to her left side and no permanent damage whatsoever. Her case became pretty medically significant because it did demonstrate that stroke intervention could succeed well beyond the traditional treatment window. But remember, none of that would have mattered if 2 labs hadn't somehow understood that their owner was in trouble, figured out how to escape a locked house, and then communicated that emergency to a human who could actually do something about it. When Maureen reflected on what happened, she put it simply: she wouldn't be alive without them. I couldn't find any later updates, but I'm very happy that Maureen survived this, and I hope she's still doing well. I also hope that both Bella and Sadie are continuing to be pet.
I had an angel across the street. I had a great rescue in the neighborhood and the hospital.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I've been working so hard on these videos recently. As I said, it's usually 10 to 12 hours a day at least. I take the odd day off. You don't have to worry about me or anything like that, but yeah. And if you did get any value out of this content, please consider subscribing. It'd mean the world.